Okay, let's dive in. We're cracking open a stack of sources today, some articles, research, your own notes, and plunging into something described as truly unprecedented.
That's right. And when you look at these materials together, the picture that emerges really challenges some widely held ideas.
Especially about faith dynamics globally.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly in certain regions.
Absolutely. So our mission with this deep dive is to pull out the most important insights from these sources to really understand what's happening according to the information right here in front of us. We're talking about remarkable, rapid growth among Muslim populations worldwide turning towards Christianity.
Right. And one of the sources actually kicks off with a really dramatic plea from someone on the ground. This was a former regional Muslim leader who became a church planter.
Wow.
And he says, and this is a quote, "You must come back to this area. A tidal wave has come. Muslims are coming to Christ in a flood. Come and help us."
The tidal wave. That's strong language.
It really sets the stage, for the kind of scale we see described across these materials.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. Unprecedented. What does that actually mean, according to these sources? It's not just a buzzword, right? They must have specifics.
Yeah, they do. The reports gathered from different organizations working in the Muslim world, they point to a scale that's really quite significant, potentially 1 million or more people turning from Islam to Jesus every single year globally.
1 million a year.
That's the figure some of these sources are suggesting. And it's not just the numbers, it's the nature of the change described.
And this is where it gets really fascinating because the sources don't just give broad numbers. They list specific, almost unbelievable things happening, like multiple cases of entire mosques coming to faith. Is that right?
Yes, that's actually in the sources. And they talk about thousands of just ordinary men and women being used in ways that seem to achieve outcomes that, previously felt impossible.
Ordinary people. And they also mention tens of thousands of people who come from a Muslim background themselves, now dedicating themselves to prayer and fasting.
Specifically for others in their communities to explore Christianity, yes. That's highlighted as a key factor.
And then there's the detail about specific people groups. Groups that previously had, no known churches.
Right. 0 churches, now having 50, sometimes over 100, planted within just 2 years of engagement. The speed is remarkable.
And it's not just rank-and-file people either. The sources point out former sheikhs, imams, even militant Islamists.
Making up a significant percentage, the sources say 20% or more of the new Christian leaders emerging in these regions.
That's a huge shift in leadership.
It is. And what's fascinating is just how rapid and widespread these changes are described as being. The sources also include some really gripping anecdotes.
Like the one about the disciple makers.
Yeah, the people focused on helping new believers grow and sort of reproduce their faith. They stuck with the town even after 5 Christians were martyred there.
That takes incredible courage.
It does. And years later, the sources say they saw 7 churches planted in that very same town.
Wow. Or the other story about the Muslim leaders in, 20 communities?
Over 20, yeah. They apparently observed positive changes in neighboring Christian families and actively sought out someone to share the same stories.
And the sources specify these were biblical accounts told in story form. That seems important.
It does seem to be a key technique mentioned, and maybe one of the most dramatic examples mentioned is a former Muslim who used to bomb churches.
No way.
Yes, and is now reportedly spending his life praying for his Muslim neighbors, making disciples, and planting churches. I mean, it's a complete 180.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To make it even more concrete, these sources share specific individual stories. Let's start with Sheikh Hanif. Who was he, according to this material?
Right, Hanif. He's described as a deeply embedded Muslim leader, followed in his father's footsteps, studied the Quran for years. He was recruited to organize Muslim communities, launch new mosques, did it very successfully for 8 years.
So, to his community, he was a respected figure, a good Muslim leader.
Absolutely. On the outside, yes. But the sources say there was something else going on inside him, a deep, kind of hidden void.
What kind of void?
Well, he longed for a real sense of certainty with God. He struggled with the violence he saw, in his Islamic world. He grieved over what he saw as a lack of compassion for suffering people. And he felt his religion didn't offer real choice or satisfying answers to life's big questions.
That sounds like a deep internal struggle.
Deep. He'd prayed 17 times a day for years, asking God to show him the right path, but he just lacked that inner peace, that salam, and any real assurance of paradise.
So he's searching. And then what happens?
And according to the source, that's when things changed dramatically for him. It started with a dream. Yes, described as very curious indeed, both overwhelming and hopeful. In this dream, he encountered a handsome, graceful man who called him by name. The man said he wanted Hanif to serve him, and crucially, that Hanif needed to learn to listen.
Okay. Did he know who this figure was?
Well, Hanif asked, "Who are you?" And the answer he received in the dream was, "I am Isa al-Masih."
Jesus.
Yes. And the figure added that if Hanif obeyed, he would succeed in finding what he longed for.
And did the dream give instructions?
Very specific instructions. Go to a particular tree near a busy road Hanif knew. Wait there before first light and look for a man whose face he was shown in the dream. This man, Isa told him, was a servant who would show him the true answers to his questions about God.
Wow, that's incredibly specific. What did Hanif do?
He woke up just fixated on that face. The source says he knew he had to act immediately, even though, finding one specific person in a chaotic, crowded road at dawn seems impossible, right?
Absolutely. Did he tell anyone? His wife?
No, he couldn't. He was afraid she might think he was, unstable or even turn him in.
So he just went.
He just went to the tree and waited, scanning face after face for over 12 hours until it was almost dark. His hope was starting to fade.
12 hours.
Meanwhile, miles away, a man named Wafi was walking with two younger leaders. Wafi is described in the sources as a disciple maker. His focus is on helping new believers grow and multiply their faith. And he also looked for people whom God had prepared, individuals who seemed receptive.
Okay.
Now, Wafi himself had recently had a dream where God apparently said, "I will give you a shake." But, it wasn't really on his mind at that exact moment.
Okay, so Wafi's walking along.
And then, in the near darkness, Hanif spots three figures coming towards him, and he recognizes the face of the man from his dream. It was Wafi, in the middle.
No way. After all that waiting.
Right. It took time for Hanif, who was obviously very excited, maybe a bit agitated, to convince Wafi he meant no harm. He was insistent, saying, "It is Isa al-Masih himself that requires you to answer my questions tonight."
That's quite a demand on a stranger.
Totally. The source notes Wafi felt this was a heavy burden, coming from a stranger like that. But he saw Hanif's intense hunger, his desperation almost, and felt he couldn't just pass up the opportunity to share. Apparently, he didn't even connect it to his own dream about a sheik until much later.
So what happened? Did they talk?
They went back to Hanif's home. His wife was, as you can imagine, completely stunned by this whole situation.
I bet.
But the sources state that within just days, both Hanif and his wife experienced what the source calls true freedom in Jesus Christ. Finding peace after all those years of uncertainty and longing.
Both of them. That quickly.
That's what the material says. And since that time, according to these sources, Hanif has been grounded in biblical teaching. He's discipled 2 new church planters himself, and he's gone on to plant 7 churches in a more challenging Muslim area. He reportedly shares his story with great joy.
That is a remarkable transformation. Just incredible. And the sources provide another powerful example, right? This one featuring Mama Nadirah and Zamil.
Yes, another really compelling story.
Let's meet Mama Nadirah first. Who is she?
Mama Nadirah is described as, an extraordinary woman, raised in a Muslim home, grounded in the Quran, the rituals. But importantly, she never had any formal education, couldn't read or write. She married a Christian man, Charles, which exposed her to Jesus. And after his death, she found her strength, the source says, in the Holy Spirit and in prayer.
And despite being unlettered, she committed to memorizing God's word. How did she do that?
By having others read to her, she built this deep understanding that way. The sources really highlight her ministry of prayer and kindness and her discovery of what they call disciple-making principles.
Those principles, again, what did that mean for her?
Yeah, this seems key in these sources. It's described as a revolutionary idea for her, the realization that ordinary people, like herself, could actually make disciples and plant churches. Using simple, reproducible methods often centered on studying the Bible together in small groups and obeying what they learned.
And this fueled her prayer life even more.
Oh, absolutely. It became incredibly fervent prayer, fasting, even all-night prayer meetings. She became a mentor to others in prayer, known for introducing friends to God's presence. She apparently excelled in training others for prayer, for making disciples, planting churches. She opened her home to anyone in need.
Just go up into her home.
Yeah, people would stay for different lengths of time until they found what they needed there. It became like a hub.
That's how she met Zamil.
Exactly. He enters the picture here. He was a very successful businessman, an influential lay leader at his mosque, very different background.
Okay.
And like Hanif, one night he also had a dream where Isa al-Masih appeared, telling him he was the light of the world.
Another dream involving Jesus. And what happened when Zamil woke up?
Well, here's the twist, described as quite ironic in the sources. Zamil woke up blind.
Blind, after a dream about the light of the world.
Exactly. The irony isn't lost in the telling.
So what did he do?
He eventually came into contact with Christians and ended up attending a prayer camp organized by Mama Nadirah.
One of her prayer events. Did they pray for his sight?
They did. Believers prayed, but his physical sight didn't return. However, the sources say he gained two things he later valued more than his sight.
Which were?
Giving his life to Jesus and meeting Mama Nadirah.
But this decision came at a high cost for him, right?
A very high cost. His family cast him out, his wife abandoned him, he lost his home, his possessions, everything.
But he didn't back down.
The sources note he did not waver in his new faith. He held firm.
And Mama Nadirah helped him.
She gave him a place to stay in her home. He started attending those Discovery Bible studies, the small group studies focused on learning directly from the Bible and obeying it. And he found this new zeal, this passion, to be successful, as he put it, in God's business.
But he was still blind. How could he be successful in God's business if he couldn't see? Didn't people tell him that?
Oh, they did. Here's the challenge posed in the source. Zamil told Mama Nadirah she wanted to go out and make disciples. And she initially told him he couldn't because he was blind.
And the missions team that trained him.
They apparently said the same thing. You can't do this, you're blind.
So what did Zamil do? Did he just accept that?
Not quite. The source recounts that one morning, Zamil simply got into a taxi and drove off. Didn't tell anyone.
Just left. Where did he go?
To a Muslim community that he felt God had put on his heart. He went specifically looking for what's termed a person of peace.
A person of peace. What's that?
In this context, it refers to someone God has prepared, someone receptive to the gospel message, and open to welcoming believers into their community, opening doors.
So a blind man sets off alone to find this person of peace. What happened?
The results, according to the sources, were absolutely incredible. He called Mama Nadirah a few days later. Then, about a month after that, he called again. News was a church had been planted in that community he'd gone to.
He planted a church while blind.
That's what the source reports. He came home briefly, but felt compelled to keep going. 6 weeks later, another church was planted in another community he somehow found his way to.
This is quite something. An unlettered widow discipling a blind former businessman who goes out and plants churches.
Exactly. This image is presented in the sources as a perfect illustration of the kind of miracle and turnabout they claim are happening daily within these movements.
And they're both still active, Mama Nadirah and Zamil.
Very much so, according to the material. Mama Nadirah's church is described as committed to engaging unreached Muslim peoples nationwide. She's credited with building multiple prayer ministries.
Training younger women, you said.
Yes, specifically training younger women as intercessors, people dedicated to focused prayer and coaching leaders of other prayer ministries. These ministries include things like advanced teams praying for groundwork before evangelists arrive, intercessors praying specifically for pioneer teams who are often in dangerous situations.
That sounds vital.
And training new Christians how to pray effectively. One prayer ministry she influenced reportedly trained hundreds and saw a harvest, the source says, of over 200,000 new Christians in 7 years.
200,000. The scale is just mind-boggling. And prayer seems absolutely central to all this.
It's emphasized repeatedly. The critical importance of every new Christian becoming an intercessor. They have networks sharing urgent requests. Over 3,000 believers are reportedly committed to immediate prayer for spiritual crises mentioned within their networks.
Immediate prayer, like an emergency response team.
Sort of, yeah. And this strong base of intercessory prayer built over 7 years across several of these rapid growth movements. It features weekly fasting and prayer as just integral. Members often spend nights a month in half-night prayer meetings.
And the churches are small, often hidden.
Often small, family-based gatherings, intentionally kept out of public view, largely for security reasons.
Which makes sense, especially as they reach more extreme areas. The sources mention persecution increasing.
Yes, as these movements engage more extreme areas, violent persecution has grown significantly, which in turn requires even higher levels of prayer support. But despite that, in the 7 years covered in some reports, over 4,000 new churches, mostly among Muslims, were planted across 5 countries.
4,000 churches in 7 years.
And common reports of dramatic community transformations accompanying this growth, things changing on a larger scale.
And those prayer camps Mama Nadirah organized are still effective.
Very effective, the sources highlight. Muslims apparently show up hungry for spiritual experience, and scores have powerful encounters that lead them to seek baptism.
And Mama Nadirah herself, the woman who couldn't read.
She now has a new house of prayer near her home, taking requests from across Africa and beyond. The source says she's leaving her mark in broader strokes than anyone might have imagined.
That's incredible. And Zamil, still blind.
Still physically blind, yes. But at the time of these reports, he was planting his 8th church among Muslims in less than 2 years, bringing the light of the world as he experienced it wherever it needs to go.
8th church in under 2 years, while blind.
That's quite a picture, isn't it? Looking at the scale in these kinds of stories, it honestly does seem almost impossible on purely human terms. And the sources themselves acknowledge that. They don't shy away from how extraordinary it sounds.
So what do these sources say is actually behind all of this momentum? What's the engine driving this?
That's the key question, right? The material attributes everything to a highly intentional focus on making disciples the way Jesus did. And they describe this approach, which is informed by the Bible, as somewhat counterintuitive compared to, say, typical modern ministry methods. It's often simpler, more relational.
Counterintuitive how?
Well, perhaps in its reliance on ordinary people, simple methods, and a deep dependence on divine action.
So the sources list specific ways God is described as working.
Exactly. They talk about God calling Christians to intercede, like we discussed, preparing the hearts of Muslims to be those bridges or people of peace in their communities.
Like Wafi finding Hanif or Zamil finding receptive people.
Precisely. And revealing Jesus and the Bible through dreams and visions, like we saw with both Hanif and Zamil, that's a recurring theme.
They also mention God turning the hearts of major Muslim leaders.
Yes, and accelerating the whole process with miracles. And maybe most dramatically, transforming former persecutors and terrorists, like that example of the former church bomber.
It's a lot of supernatural claims.
It is. But crucially, while they acknowledge there are extraordinary people involved, people like Mama Nadirah, Zamil, Hanif, who persevere under extreme risks. The core message, the headline, as the sources present it, seems to be an invitation.
An invitation to who?
To you, to the listener, to see that God is described here as extravagantly investing his love, actively drawing people to himself, and looking for partners, people willing to cooperate in what he's doing. It's framed not just as something amazing happening over there, but maybe as a demonstration of how God works.
And that anyone can participate.
That seems to be the implication. Often through those simple intentional methods like the disciple-making principles Mama Nadirah discovered, it doesn't necessarily require degrees or resources, according to this perspective.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive today, from the widespread reports of this unprecedented growth and transformation to the deeply personal and frankly dramatic stories of Sheikh Hanif, Mama Nadirah, and Zamil.
Yeah.
It really paints a picture of rapid, significant change happening in unexpected ways, often through individuals who faced considerable limitations.
This dive into these sources has certainly provided a fascinating perspective. It definitely goes beyond the typical headlines you might see.
For sure. It highlights both, well, what's described as dramatic divine action and also this very intentional human response.
Absolutely. And thinking about the sheer scale described, the million-a-year figure, and the role of things like dreams and visions, which come up again and again.
And especially the emphasis on prayer and simple disciple-making methods employed by individuals like an unlettered widow and a blind businessman.
Yeah.
It really makes you pause, doesn't it?
It really does. And it kind of raises an important question, maybe something for you, the listener, to consider. Given the significant challenges these individuals faced, illiteracy, blindness, the very real risk of persecution, and the extraordinary outcomes the sources describe, what does that tell you about where transformation really begins? And maybe more importantly, who God might choose to use to bring it about?